All right, welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I am joined by Adam Laviano, contributor for Blackand Teal. How are you doing?
Doing well, Andy. How are you?
I am doing well. Any day I get to talk about football is a good day.
Absolutely.
And the Jaguars are such an interesting case. They, going back a few years, they had the opportunity. They were on the doorstep of the Super Bowl, didn't work out. Everything had to be torn down, and it just kind of been a mess since.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
there's been a lot going in there. And I guess what I first want to touch on is the Urban Meyer stuff. I mean, that just had to be just the weirdest year last year. And so talk a little bit about the Urban Meyer debacle and maybe the fallout that maybe kind of leads going forward for the franchise.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of people were high on Urban Meyer coming in. He had a lot of success at UF, which is right in Jacksonville's backyard. So there's a lot of big college football fans in the area. So a lot of people were really excited about him. And then, the bad decisions started early and they just kind of started snowballing. And I think for a lot of people, the breaking point was after the Cincinnati game when he chose to not fly back with the team. And then the videos came out of him at a bar. And so apparently he didn't handle that well and kind of got caught in a lie. And, more things happened. And finally, I think the breaking point was the Josh Lambo story when the kicker came out and said, "Hey, head coach kicked me during practice."
Yeah, it's so interesting. Obviously there were clues, going back to his, college days,
Yeah.
just about everything. And then even hearing that, he didn't even know some of the defensive players, that should have been key players. I believe it was for the Rams or who there was a player that he didn't know.
There was a story that came out that he didn't know Aaron Donald,
Aaron Donald,
also
yes.
Debo Samuel, and he on more than one occasion mispronounced his own players' names, which told us that he wasn't really plugged into his personnel.
Yeah, you look at that. I mean, it's such an interesting, time to have that personality there. With Trevor Lawrence. You
Yeah.
know, it, do you think Urban Meyer being there maybe stunted his growth at all?
It definitely didn't help him get off to a fast start. But I think Trevor Lawrence is the kind of guy with the maturity and the strong character where he can overcome this now that he's in much better hands. Doug Pederson has had success at the coaching level. He's been on Super Bowl teams as a backup quarterback. So I think he's much more equipped to help a young quarterback, especially one with as much potential as Trevor, kind of make that adjustment to the league. But so I don't think last year was a complete loss because he still got that NFL experience. And he obviously showed us that he was mature enough to handle the media and answering questions every week.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that off the field stuff, that's a huge part of being, an NFL quarterback. What about Trevor Lawrence's game? Did you see last year that gives you hope as a Jaguars fan that going into next year and the year after that he can take that next step?
Absolutely. Well, I think throughout the season, he made a number of big time throws where he just looked like he belonged, so he flashed that potential, that strong arm, that accuracy that made him such a, highly held prospect in a lot of people's opinions. So I think, he consistently kind of flashed. And then at the end, that final game against Indianapolis, he really showed us what he could do, and that he wasn't going to just roll over. He was going to keep fighting and keep playing, and that he did get better throughout the year.
Yeah, as a Bears fan, I kind of know that you get a young quarterback, Justin Fields. You want to see little glimpses that they've got it. In that first year, you don't. I mean, I think we as fans maybe get spoiled and think that every first year quarterback or player is just going to flash right away, but it takes time to
Yeah.
develop. And you see those things. I think that's a positive. And when you look at some of his supporting cast, it's kind going to be an interesting thing. You know, when you look at the running back situation, and my guy Wheels Up here has a question in that kind of vein. So do you think that Travis Etienne will be like a wide receiver H-back, kind of a Debo type?
Yeah, I think you're going to see him, line up all over the field. I think he's definitely going to line up as a wide receiver. And I think it's going to be really interesting when James Robinson gets back to see how the two of them complement each other and to see if there's some packages for the two of them to be on the field at the same time as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at where James Robinson came from and just how good he had done and then his role last year, it just seemed to be a little bit confusing. I don't know if that was Urban Meyer or what
Yeah.
was that?
Yeah, I think that was part of some Urban Meyer decision making. There was a game where he fumbled, and he had fumbled the previous week, and Urban Meyer allegedly made the decision to sit him down, and he got a lot of pushback because he was clearly the superior back between him and Carlos Hyde, who was one of Urban's guys at Ohio State.
Yeah, and so you look at going into this year, and you look on ESPN, the depth chart says Etienne's number one, James Robinson's number two. I don't know if that's just because Robinson's hurt or how do you see this backfield shaping up, and then obviously with the addition of Snoop Connor as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation with Robinson, still coming back from injury. We don't know exactly when we're going to see him. So that kind of gives Etienne the opportunity to be the workhorse back and do a lot, at the running back position as well, especially in that first part of the year. So I think we're going to see, a heavy dose of Travis Etienne early on. And I think Snoop Connor and possibly Rock Armstead are going to complement him more as those power backs.
So fantasy football, where would you say, James Robinson, is he draftable? Is he, later on?
Yeah, I think some people are gonna, draft him, take a shot and stash him, and it's gonna pay off for him because he's a guy that, being undrafted and coming on like he did in the league, I think he can come back from this injury strong. And I think there's a strong role for him and Etienne to exist in the weekly game plan together. So, how soon he'll go, I can't see a lot of people taking him too soon. I think Travis Etienne, on the other hand, he could go, in those earlier rounds.
Yeah, and you look at what Debo had to do with the 49ers, and that was out of necessity, because of their injuries and things like that. And then he was amazing at it. The Jaguars, they're not going to necessarily need that once James Robinson is healthy.
Yeah. Well, we could have used it last year. That's for sure with the wide receiver injuries we had. I think they really want to use him as that chess piece. And I think they see a few guys on their offense that they can move around with Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk. And I think Travis Etienne's going to be, one of the guys that's his versatility is going to be taken advantage of, more than the others.
Yeah, and so you look at that offense, and I mean that has to be the running back has to be the strength of the offense, correct?
Yeah, I think when the two backs, when James Robinson and Etienne are playing together, I think that's going to absolutely be the strength of this offense.
Yeah, because you look at the receivers, and who is number one? I mean, this is just an interesting group here.
Well, they paid Christian Kirk to be like he's a number one option, And then last year with the injury to DJ Chark, that kind of thrust Marvin Jones into action, and he played admirably for a number one option. I think the idea going into this year is that Kirk is going to be probably targeted the most out of the wide receivers, but Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne, Marvin Jones, they're going to catch a lot of passes for this team.
So, yeah, I mean, the money says that Christian Kirk is a number one. Is he realistically a number one caliber wide receiver?
Well, we're going to see, I was reading earlier today that he's paid like he's the 14th best receiver in the league. And I don't know how far away, he can actually be from that. We're going to find out. I think early on, we'll see if he can live up to that. But I think he's going to get his chance to prove that he can be the number one. He's going to get the targets early on. If he takes advantage of it, he could be a really good fantasy option.
Would you look at, I guess, the pecking order, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even the gifts of each of the receivers,
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence, I mean, his gifts, can play into this as well. Is he better, with the deep ball, or is he better kind of with the slant?
Yeah. I think he excels, all three phases throwing the ball. And I think that we didn't have enough of the deep ball plays last year because of the injuries. We saw it, about midway through the season or so, Jamal Agnew started coming on. He was brought in to be that stud kick returner. And because of injuries, he got to play a lot of receiver. And we saw some big plays from him. Not a whole lot outside of him. We saw Laviska Shenault get a good one, but not a lot, So I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year. I think that's something that they're expecting Christian Kirk to really bring to the table.
Well, you talk about, the rest of the offense as well. I mean, my guy Wheels up here commented on the O-line. He believes the O-line is underrated.
Yeah.
Talk about that group and how they're going to fit into the offense.
Yeah, well, there's actually some changes going on with the O-line this year. I mean, we were able to retain Cam Robinson, so that was a big part of it. Bringing in Brandon Sheriff from Washington also really
Iowa guy
improves that guard spot.
Mm-hmm.
And he's an upgrade, absolutely. But there's a lot of unknown because we lost Brandon Linder to retirement, our 8-year veteran on the offensive line, who really solidified that line and was a leader for the team. And so he retired this offseason, and we have a longtime backup, Tyler Shatley. He's competing with their third-round pick, Luke Fortner, out of Kentucky, and we're going to see how that competition shakes out. Shatley's been a very good backup for some time, so that one could go either way. So there's some competition there. And then at the left guard spot, going into training camp, kind of Ben Barch is the guy to beat. And he's been with the team a year or so, and he's really been one of those developmental guys that looks the part, and he's going to have his chance to prove it, looks like.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at these players, I mean, and that's going to be huge for the overall, I mean, running game, but even the development of Trevor Lawrence, to having that time, to continue to throw that deep ball and develop those relationships with the receivers.
And so Cam Robinson, that's a big part of that, ensuring that protection. Brandon Sheriff, absolutely. And then on the right side, we got some more competition. We have Jawan Taylor, who's been with the team a few years, and he's penalty prone. And, a lot of people get on him for false starts and whatnot. And he's going to be competing with a second-round pick last year. Losing the name off the top of my head here. But guy who was hurt at the end of his college career coming out of Stanford. And he's going to have a chance to compete at that right tackle spot and possibly be a swing tackle as well. But they got a lot of depth there on that O-line. And, as you can tell, a lot of competition.
That Walker Little, I think you were
Walker
talking about.
Little. Yep. I don't know how I can forget that name.
Right. Well, and you look at, the team and they have been higher up in the draft. And so, just kind of looking at some of the players, you touched on Luke Fortner that may play a big role in that offensive line.
Yeah.
Touch on some of the other players. Obviously, we know Trevon Walker, Devin Lloyd. Touch on some of the other players that you see in this draft that may be huge impact players for this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Trevon Walker, Devin Lloyd, those two guys, I think they're going to be a big part of improving this run defense, and big part of just giving the new defensive coordinator the personnel that he wants to run his scheme.
Yeah. And I mean, hopefully there's not 3 years in a row, at the top of the draft, right?
Yeah. I think we can almost guarantee that at this point. we brought in a lot of talent the last few years, not just this offseason, but we brought in some talent last year that's returning as well. And obviously, we got a big upgrade with the coaching staff. They know what it takes to win. There's a lot of ex-players on the new coaching staff as well. So we feel like we're going to be better equipped to take our guys and put a better product on the field each week.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Doug Pederson, and it's helpful, him having played the quarterback position in the NFL, with that, development, with going forward with the team.
Yeah.
What else with that offense and just with the whole team do
Yeah.
you see him, excelling at it? And then, like, how different is he of a person than
Yeah.
Urban Meyer?
Yeah, well, I think from a football standpoint, at the NFL level, he really seems to know what he wants to do, and he seems like he, will be able to put, the guys in the best position to succeed. It doesn't have to exactly fit his blueprint. He's going to look at what he has and he's going to, put it to good use. And, that's kind of what the feeling you had with Urban Meyer was. He didn't know exactly what to do with the guys at this level, and at the NFL level, you got to outcoach the other guys that are on the other end of the sideline each week. And a lot of these other coaches on other teams, they've been doing it for a long time. So Urban Meyer just, wasn't exactly prepared, I don't think, to have success, especially with the team that needed a leader to lead a turnaround, right? So we needed a strong character guy that when he was going to say own it, you knew that he would do that. And Doug Pederson appears to be that guy. All the reports are he's a strong character guy. What you see is what you get. He's a good communicator and a lot of NFL experience.
Were you surprised that it wasn't Byron Leftwich or someone else?
What's that?
Were you surprised that it wasn't Byron Leftwich or maybe another candidate?
I think the three big names, it was Byron Leftwich was very popular with the fan base. He was definitely one of the more popular options. I think Doug Pederson and Jim Caldwell was also a popular name. So I don't think I would have been surprised with either of those three guys. After the decision was made, it sounded like Doug was a front runner the whole time. But, wouldn't be surprised if they were just making it sound like that. But the fan base was absolutely high on Byron Leftwich. A lot of them, that was their guy, and they were disappointed when they didn't get him.
When you look at the team and, they've been known for defense, for a while in the past.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the key players, you touched on some of the rookies. What are some other key players that need to step up in 2022 for them to be successful?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are expecting Josh Allen to have a big year. He had a great rookie season, 10.5 sacks when he had a lot of guys on that defensive line around him. And the last few years, he's kind of been the only guy that the other teams have had to game plan for that they've really had to worry about. And he's had a few big games here or there, especially the one last year against the Bills where he was the better Josh Allen on the field that day. And it's expected now with Trayvon Walker, with Devin Lloyd, with Oluokun, the middle linebacker coming over from Atlanta. They're expected to be a better cast around him, and he's expected to shine. And, he's a vocal leader. He's a hard worker, and he says all the right things. And I think, this is his year to really break out.
When you look at the defense as a whole, what would you say the kind of now the strength is going to be and maybe the weakness of this defense overall?
I think the run defense, it seems like that's what they really addressed. And they really addressed all three levels in the offseason. They addressed the line and free agency. They brought over Fatukasi from the New York Jets, and he's going to be a big part of that defensive front. They also had Malcolm Brown and a few other guys. And then bringing in Trayvon Walker, Devin Lloyd, and Chad Muma is expected to be on the field in some sort of form as well. That's a lot of improvement. That's a complete overhaul, really, at the linebacker level.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the secondary, we had two strong corners last year, and Shaquille Griffin and Tyson Campbell really started coming on towards the end of the year. And to add Darius Williams, a Jacksonville guy returning home, we feel like we got three strong corners, and it's going to, the secondary is going to be much improved as well.
So I had a couple comments. My guy Wheels Up here. Over under 3 years, will this team be in London?
Oh, I don't think so. I think with all the construction that's going on in Jacksonville, that Shad Khan's really invested in Jacksonville, and we're going to continue to build around the stadium and kind of develop that shipyard area right there on the river. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they get back to what they had committed to at some point, and they play 2 games over there for a period of time. I know that the local fan base doesn't love it, but it does great things for the revenue and overall for the long term, it helps keep the team in Jacksonville. But I don't think they're going to be uprooting a team to London anytime soon. I think logistically, there's a lot of things to be worked out there as well.
My guy also, Stevo Supremo here had another question going back to some fantasy stuff. His rule is don't draft players on bad teams unless it's a 14-team league. So give us your pitch for us to draft Jacksonville Jaguars on our fantasy teams.
Well, I do got to say, the Jaguars struggled for a long time, and Maurice Jones-Drew was a fantasy stud, and I definitely took advantage of that. But, I'd say Travis Etienne is a really interesting running back. I think that, you could get him for a good value, and he could surprise a lot of people. There's a lot of upside there. I think, the other two to really look at would be Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. I think he's going to have a lot of volume. And, like a lot of these guys they're new and just going to be forming a relationship with Trevor Lawrence. If he's catching those balls and getting open, early, then there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him throughout the season.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you look at, maybe the teams that are offensively they're questioned. It is kind of it's a roll of the dice, I mean, but it could really, help, later on, because then, a team, maybe if they're not in the, playoff hunt, that maybe, they're going to be playing late in the season.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Jaguars, then what are your expectations for the season? I mean, are you expecting them to play late into the season, in contention?
Obviously that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that they can contend for an AFC title, but I think that the expectation really is to get out of the cellar of the NFL where we've been the last few years. I mean, picking number 1 overall 2 years in a row. And I think we brought in the personnel and we have the coaching staff to make a big jump. So I think that it's very realistic that if the key players stay healthy and everybody can adjust to the new scheme and the new coaching, I think that 6 to 8 wins is a very realistic possibility. And when it comes to the division, it's Tennessee and Indianapolis that are kind of ruling it the last few years. And, some people kind of think Tennessee might be dropping off, and it really looks like Indianapolis made a big push this offseason to make a run with all the pieces they added.
Well, speaking of that, just kind of, talking about the AFC South, go ahead and rank what your thoughts are on the division quarterbacks.
Yeah, quarterbacks. I think Matt Ryan still has some in the tank, and I think he's going to be somewhat rejuvenated with a new cast around him, new city and everything like that. So, I think he's the guy at the top of that. And then, going into the year, I think Ryan Tannehill, has shown more than obviously, Trevor Lawrence and Mills down in Houston. So I think he would be number 2. And then I'd put Trevor Lawrence at number 3 and Mills at number 4. But I think at the end of the year, that looks different. And, I think Trevor Lawrence and Matt Ryan are the 2 at the top of that.
When you look at this division, is this kind of the only division? Like, I mean, you look at now the Jaguars. Is this the only division that the Jaguars would maybe potentially have a path to the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the weaker divisions, and it's one of those divisions that, they can be weak for, a few years in a row. And then all of a sudden there's three playoff teams. So we've seen fast turnarounds in the division. Right now, the quarterback situation is a little shaky, and it looks like the Jaguars are the one with the long-term solution. That's obviously, pending Trevor Lawrence taking a big jump this year than last year. But I think that, there was a lot of chaos, and, he's primed to make that jump this year and kind of show everybody that he's going to be in Jacksonville for the long term, and he can be a top quarterback in this league.
When you look at him, obviously at where we're at now, we're not even to really, the full training caps and everything. And then till the end of the season, what do you want to see from Trevor Lawrence to say, okay, yes, he's taken that next step?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, statistically a lot of room for improvement from last year, especially in the TD to interception ratio, we're looking at 12 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. That's obviously not going to cut it at this level. So I think we're going to see a big jump there. I think he's obviously going to move to the positive. And I think he might not necessarily be a 30 touchdown pass guy this year, but he could very well be in the upper 20s. And I think a lot of that will be because we're going to be a run heavy team. And I think when we get close to that goal line, you're going to see a lot of James Robinson and possibly some of these other backs, depending on how they play early in the season.
Now, when you look at the Jaguars as a whole, and you look at the AFC, obviously you have studied and followed the AFC. What are there some teams that you kind of look at and you say this team might be a bust in 2022?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions about Tennessee, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with the quarterback position? Ryan Tannehill, he took it hard. He was caught off guard or whatnot, and he wasn't really happy about them bringing in competition. And then, the way that the season ended for them, it wasn't so great. So, I think that could be a team that falls off this year. I think Miami's an interesting team. They made a lot of investments and they got a lot of change going on down there. So I feel like they kind of are in a boom or bust year themselves. If Tua comes on strong and Tyreek Hill and the new coaching staff can really get that offense going, I think that, they could be a playoff contender. But at the same time, I could see like a lot of those, new additions, a lot of those changes not going well.
Yeah. Everyone can kind of make the projections and kind of look at things, but when a team has a lot of question marks, we just don't know, when you haven't seen players together, I think that's something that you want to see before you actually kind of say, okay, well this team's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Jets, they have a lot of question marks around them as well. Similar situation as the Jaguars, second year quarterback, still a lot of new pieces, trying to add a lot of talent there. So, we'll see how Zach Wilson, steps up to the plate this year, as well as Trevor Lawrence, and all these other, second year quarterbacks.
Now, the AFC, it's such an interesting. It has to be the most difficult. Obviously, it's more difficult than NFC. And you look at it, and I'm sure as a Jaguars fan, it's hard right now to be like, okay, the Jaguars are going to be in the playoffs. Jaguars are going to be in the Super Bowl. But long term, every fan, every person that follows the team, they want their team in the Super Bowl. So you're looking at the Jaguars. Then my question then. How far away from the Super Bowl are the Jaguars?
I think that with Doug Pederson's track record, what he did in Philadelphia, I wouldn't put it past them, that 3 years could be possible for him to get this thing going. I don't think anybody's expecting them to be a real, threat this year. Obviously, things could go our way, and things could, end up in that direction. We've seen Cinderella teams make runs in the past. Um, so we don't want to, limit that possibility. But I think, more realistically, I think we're a few years away of seriously competing and, being in every year contenders for the AFC South. Absolutely.
And when you look at, Jacksonville, I mean,
Yeah.
a team in Jacksonville, I mean, long term, you said they're kind of doing, a lot of kind of building and construction in the area. Um, is it really viable, do you think, to keep the Jaguars there long term?
Yeah, well, I think Florida's seen a lot of growth in the last few years, and I think Jacksonville, just with the amount of homes and jobs that are coming to that area, it's only going to become a stronger market. And you put a winning football team into that mix, and some savvy business guys that are doing what they're doing with London and other initiatives to make it work. I think that this thing is a sustainable franchise in Jacksonville, and you know I think that there was talk about LA, and we survived that, and obviously there's going to be chatter about London because of the owners' interests over there, and our commitment to playing there and everything. But I think that more or less helps ensure the team stays in Jacksonville for the long term.
Yeah, and thinking about the long term, it starts in training camp. Are there any stories that you're watching closely, that will really inform you about this team going into 2022?
Yeah, I don't know how many of the stories that are going to inform us about the overall success. I think that there's some position battles and just some guys that people are keeping an eye on. I think the offensive line and how that shakes out is going to be one of the top storylines because there's competition at center, there's competition at right tackle. So I think that's a big deal, and people are going to be really paying attention to that. And then I think on the defensive side of the ball, we're going to be looking at these newcomers, these high draft picks, and Walker and Lloyd especially. And I think that there's a guy in Andre Cisco from last year who is, didn't get a whole lot of playing time last year, but is really going to get his shot to start for this team at the safety position this year. And a lot of people are high on what his ceiling can actually be, because he was a playmaker in college and got a lot of interceptions. And for whatever reason last year we didn't get to see a whole lot of him till the end, but what we did see we liked. So I think he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on, Andre Cisco.
And every team wants to avoid injuries and things like that. I mean, is there something maybe that the Jaguars are going to do now that they're under Doug Pederson that's going to be better from what you've heard from what
Yeah.
Urban Meyer was doing?
Yeah, it sounds like Urban Meyer's practices were a bit intense, and although he really promoted the kind of self-care, the care that you take care of your body after practice and stuff like that, and some of the amenities and different treatments that he brought into the building, were that he ran them tough, and that even Doug Marrone before him kind of ran his guys tough at times as well. And so I think Doug Pederson is going to be a little bit wiser about that. And I think, we did have some injury scare already with the backup quarterback, CJ Beathard. It looks like he's going to be okay and everything. It's a minor groin injury, but it scared a lot of people that we might have to, panic and go get a backup quarterback, because he's looked at as a really solid backup quarterback. And then we lost a defensive end linebacker, Jordan Smith, for the year. So Doug Pederson has recently said that, he's given a lot of the veterans, except a handful of veterans and some of the younger guys, a lot of the time off during the off-season activities. So I think he's being wise with that, and just his experience, he'll know when to push and when to back off a little bit. He did say, however, that those injuries didn't play a part in him resting the other guys. So it sounds like he kind of had that plan, going in.
Talking about quarterbacks and having a plan, and when you look at some of the quarterbacks, the younger quarterbacks, Steve Supremo had this question: who's having a better year this year, Trey Lance, Lawrence, or Zach Wilson?
Yeah, I think it's Trevor Lawrence. I think he's really got the guys around him, and more importantly, the coaching staff to take the jump. So I think he's more of the sure bet there. I think Trey Lance is a really interesting guy. Obviously he's got some really creative coaching over there with Kyle Shanahan. So if he can put it together, he's got a really strong upside as well. I think people are more skeptical about Zach Wilson out of the three. So we'll see. He's got a lot of young pieces around him as well. So how are some of these guys going to take the jump, forward, and how are these, new guys going to come onto the league?
Yeah, I mean, nationally, you hearing so much, especially on NFL Network about how within the organization, Trey Lance, people are being skeptical, and
Yeah.
I mean, they with what they gave up, I mean, they have to bet on him.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are like, he's really good or he's going to be awful. Like, there's not a lot of middle ground, it seems like, in the opinions on him.
And why is it different with Trevor Lawrence? Just because of like his pedigree, in college,
Yeah.
he proved it.
I think that's absolutely it. I think his pedigree, people have seen what he did on the big stage, and I think his maturity, and when you have a guy that says all the right things, that handled a lot of adversity in year one very, very well, for someone his age, because he's a younger guy, and so I think that says a lot about him, the pedigree, the maturity that he's shown. But he does have fantastic arm. We saw some big time throws last year. He's got the accuracy, he's got the strength. He's got to be more consistent. But it seems like this coaching staff, not just the head coach, but the supporting cast around Trevor Lawrence, is really well suited to help him make that jump.
So overall, as a Jaguars fan and someone who covers the team, is this the most maybe excitement that you've had for a team?
Yeah,
Um,
well,
yeah,
there was a lot of excitement last year, I'll tell you
yeah.
that. And I was one of the ones that bought into it. There were some people that were strongly against Urban Meyer and critical of him, but I think the majority of people kind of bought into the hype. He gave us a lot of good sound bites, early on, and a lot of Gator fans in that part of the country remember that success he had. There's Ohio State fans everywhere, so there's some of them down there as well. So I think there was a lot of hype last year, but I think there's a lot of hype this year as well. And I think the hype this year, you can kind of hang your hat on it a little bit more with the NFL background that Doug Pederson has, and really, the professionalism that he's shown. He's really seems to has a grasp on his personnel. Who he has in that locker room.
Is there an issue with the general manager with the Jaguars at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the perception was that Shad Khan should have cleared house after Urban Meyer, because Trent Baalke was hired by the previous GM, Dave Caldwell, and then when he was outed, he was kind of given the job. And I think a lot of people wanted a new face. They wanted a fresh set of eyes, kind of leading the personnel and the decision making high up. But I think that, after the draft, a lot of that chatter, the fire bulky chatter and all that, died down quite a bit. And I know that he's talked to the media quite a bit and kind of shown a bit more of his personality. It kind of seems like he's aware of the perception of him, and that he's kind of showing people who he really is. But, he has made a lot of good personnel decisions in the past in San Francisco and helped build a team there. And, we're still, I think the jury's out on him. I think this year is really, going to tell us a lot about the decisions that, we made from last year and this year. Now, one of the interesting things is, how much decision making did Urban Meyer have? Did he overrule Trent Baalke at times in last year's draft? We don't know any of that, but if some of those draft picks from last year come on strong this year, some of the free agents from both years and draft picks from this year play well, I think then, the tide's going to kind of turn for him and people will look at him more favorably. But I think that this year will kind of say a lot about, whether or not people will try to run him out of town again next offseason.
And Shad Khan's not going to do that, consecutive off seasons, would he?
Yeah. Yeah, he really hasn't shown that from a track record of hiring and firing people. He's given people, head coaches, especially, more than enough time. People have said, Doug Marrone got a lot of time. Gus Bradley got a lot of time. So, I think he's patient, but he's got to see progress going in the right direction. And I think there was a lot of hype about Urban Meyer, but there was a lot of unknown. There's a lot less unknown about Doug Pederson, how he's going to carry himself, how he's going to lead this football team.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the Jaguars, there's a ton of potential, in hopefully this year they start to kind of show that. I mean, that's what you want to see. I like young quarterbacks. I like, teams on the rise and different teams.
Yeah.
For me, I'm a Bears fan, and we went over this on Twitter. I'm not expecting much this year.
Yeah.
And if my team's not going to be in the Super Bowl, I want a different team to be in the Super Bowl. And if it's, eventually the Jaguars, I'm good with that too.
Yeah. I always like seeing teams win it that haven't won it before,
Mm-hmm.
And seeing young teams kind of come out of nowhere and shock people, kind of like the Bengals did last year. That's fun to watch. I think it's exciting. I think a lot of people kind of wanted us to follow what they did and go and get that number one wide receiver early on in this year's draft, because that's worked for a lot of these young quarterbacks. It worked for Joe Burrow, obviously. And then you look at, Kyler Murray, they went out and got DeAndre Hopkins, and they already had good receiver and Larry Fitzgerald. And then they had Christian Kirk and brought in, AJ Green. So like you see a lot of these teams, and Josh Allen, they went out and got him, Stephon Diggs, really go out and get their guys a top receiver. And these young quarterbacks made that jump. And so a lot of fans were disappointed that we didn't necessarily go out and do that, with that big name splash signing. But I don't think Doug Pederson is looking at that as a necessity, because when he led the Philadelphia Eagles to their Super Bowl victory, they didn't have that one wide receiver. They had a cast of guys who were all contributing. And I think that's kind of what we have now. Marvin Jones can play. Everybody knows that. Christian Kirk can play. We don't know if he can play like a number one, but we know he can play. Zay Jones adds a lot of depth. And then we're really hoping that this is the year Laviska Shenault can really turn it on, because he showed a ton of potential at Colorado in college and has flashed, amazing potential in the league when he gets the ball in his hands. And last year's coaching staff didn't do a good enough job getting Shenault the ball in his hands. But man, is he a monster when he is running full steam.
So fantasy football wise, we should buy into the Laviska Shenault hype then for this year.
Yeah, maybe not draft him, but keep an eye on him in those first few weeks. I made the mistake of drafting him last year, sitting him on my bench, and he didn't sit there all year long.
Yeah, and talking about potential and things like that, and the Bears, you can go ahead and hit me with it. We talked about on Twitter a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me, give me a case for the Bears being one of the worst teams in the NFL this year.
Yeah, well, I think the obvious storyline is they didn't do enough around Justin Fields, and seeing Allen Robinson leave. Jaguars fans, we went through this. We should have paid that man to stay. And I think the Chicago Bears, would have been a better team if they were able to keep him, obviously. Not sure how interested he was or not, but that would obviously be a big-time weapon for Fields, like it was for Bortles, because he could go up and get that ball. So I think, you'd like to see them get some more weapons for Fields. And I think there's a lot of unknown, obviously, with a new head coach coming in as well. And really not seeing a whole lot from Fields last year. Part of that is that wasn't the plan going into the year, and that I think hinders a guy's growth. Even in Jacksonville, everybody knew Trevor Lawrence was going to be the guy, the day one starter. But Urban Meyer had this competition between him and Gardner Minshew, probably just to boost Minshew's trade value. And, when the season started, people look back at that and say, hey, that was probably detrimental to preparing Trevor Lawrence to have success for the regular season. So I think like that, Justin Fields, was hindered by not being, that guy, from the get-go. So we'll see, how that new coaching staff comes in and what the weapons are around him. I believe it's Mooney. A lot of people are high on him, so at least in the running game as well. So there's not nothing, but I think that the knock really in the offseason will then do enough, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So would you rather take first question, would you rather take the Jaguars over the Bears in 2022? And then the second question is, who would you rather take long term with what they have now, the
Yeah.
Bears or the Jaguars?
Yeah, I think 2022, I think the Jaguars are going to make that jump. I think the Bears, they could, but I think that there's a lot less, a lot more unknown,
Mhm.
so I'd be less sure that they're going to make, a significant jump as I am with, the Jaguars. And, a big part of that is Trevor Lawrence, obviously, seeing the flashes, seeing the improvement, especially in that final game, just kind of knowing what we had in him all along, but knowing that he's in better hands this year and that Doug Pederson is going to help him get better. And I like Fields. I just think that Trevor Lawrence isn't going to be in a better position this year to have team success as well as that individual improvement.
So then long term, I mean, when you look at it, I mean, trajectory, do you
Yeah.
see the Jaguars being better in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year is going to tell us that, really.
Mhm.
Trevor Lawrence makes that jump that everybody thinks he's gonna. I think we got our guy, and things are going to go up, and we're going to be contending, in the near future.
Yeah, and you look at, I definitely agree with your Bears assessment. There are too many holes. I mean, you want to be able to,
Yeah,
yes, everybody wants that big splash receiver, but if the team's not ready to win,
yeah,
you need to fill other holes first.
yeah, yeah. And I think, I'm also a little bit more sure about the Jags defense at this point.
Hmm.
We've been filling holes the last few years, and we had a lot of improvement last year. We have a new scheme this year, but we we added a lot of talent. We kept a lot of good guys, and we completely overhauled the linebacker group. So I think we're going to see a lot of improvement from that position group, and I think that this coaching staff knows how to use their guys, being a lot of ex players. And the new defensive coordinator, he's coming from Tampa Bay. He saw um, a really good defense operate with a strong linebacking group. And I think that's what he aims to do with the Jaguars.
Well, Steve O does say the Bears do have a tough schedule. They
Yeah.
do, and I'm not really expecting much. The Jaguars, there's a path to at least do well in their
Yeah.
division. Matt Ryan, you talked about him being up there, but I mean, there's still some question marks there too.
Yeah, absolutely. He's getting up there in age, but you like that he's got a group of young receivers around him.
Hmm.
You like that he's got a really good defense,
Hmm.
on the other side of the ball, and you got a lot of faith in that coaching staff and Frank Wright kind of being a quarterback friendly system. I mean, I know they're looking at him as an upgrade over Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz got him to the doorstep of the playoffs until the Jaguars shut that door in their face last year. So, I think going into this year, the AFC South, the Colts are the team to beat, and the Tennessee Titans are falling off. They could very
Hmm.
well prove me wrong, but that's just kind of how I'm reading it based off like the offseason moves. I think losing AJ Brown is big for Tennessee, and you can't count on Treylon Burks to fill those shoes. Year one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun, Adam. Although I'm a little bit more depressed than I was at the start about my Bears.
Sorry about that.
But it makes sense. I mean, it's not something anybody wants to say league wide,
Yeah.
that the Jaguars have a better outlook than their team, but it is what it is.
But how did we get here?
It really is,
A lot
yeah.
of losses.
But it's taken the Jaguars a little while that to
Yeah.
to kind of build, and if you have the foundation right,
Yeah.
and you're building towards something, that's a good thing. And having a quarterback that you think is going to be the guy is a big step. And both franchises have that, but I do agree with your assessment. Unfortunately, that the Jaguars, have a better outlook this year and maybe the next couple years than the Bears.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I think the ceiling, for Justin Fields is really high. With his athletic ability, he seems to have all the tools that he needs to have success. But for a lot of these guys, it's what's around him. Is he going to be coached well? Does he have enough weapons to throw to? And what's the other side of the ball look like as well? Is he having to do it all? Early on in his career, and carry the team. So there's a lot of unknowns, but I think, he's got a ton of potential and he could really show everybody this year that, maybe he should have been chosen number 2 overall instead of Zach Wilson.
Great stuff. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on. And where can everyone find you again, Adam?
Absolutely. I'm on Twitter. It's CO Mountain Jag. And I'm also a contributor for blackandteal.com as well.
Well, very good. And how often, when the season gets, going, are you going to be having articles, things like that?
Yeah. I usually put out a few each month. We'll see how the season goes. It's a little bit harder during the off season to, keep plugging away. But, once the bullets start flying, there's going to be a lot more to write about.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Thanks again, Adam.
Thank you, Andy.